to the authorities of the United Nations, the representatives of the various countries that comprise it, and all the citizens of the world who are watching us, good afternoon. For those who do not know, I am not a politician. I am an economist, a libertarian liberal economist who never had the ambition to engage in politics and who was honored with the position of President of the Republic of Argentina in the face of the resounding failure of over a century of collectivist policies that destroyed our country. This is my first speech before the United Nations General Assembly, and I want to take this opportunity to, with humility, alert the various nations of the world about the path they have been following for decades and the danger that implies if this organization fails to fulfill its original mission. I do not come here to tell the world what it has to do. I come here to tell the world, on one hand, what will happen if the United Nations continues to promote the collectivist policies that it has been advocating under the mandate of the Agenda 2030, and on the other hand, what values the new Republic of Argentina defends. I want to begin by giving credit where credit is due. The United Nations was born from the horror of the bloodiest war in global history, with the main objective of ensuring that it never happens again. To this end, the organization engraved its fundamental principles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There, a basic agreement was recorded around a maxim that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Under the auspices of this organization and the adoption of these ideas, for the past 70 years, humanity has experienced the longest period of global peace in history, which also coincided with the period of greatest economic growth in history. An international forum was created where nations could resolve their conflicts through cooperation, instead of immediately resorting to arms, and it was achieved to permanently seat the 5 largest powers in the world at the same table, each with the same veto power, despite having completely opposing interests. All of this did not make the scourge of war disappear, but for now, it has succeeded in preventing any conflict from escalating to global proportions. The result was that we went from having 2 world wars in less than 40 years, which together claimed more than 120 million lives, to having 70 consecutive years of relative peace and global stability under the mantle of an order that allowed the entire world to integrate commercially, compete, and prosper. Because where trade enters, bullets do not, said Bastiat, because trade guarantees peace, freedom guarantees trade, and equality before the law guarantees freedom. Ultimately, what the prophet Isaiah foretold has come to pass, as is read in the park across the street. God will judge between the nations and will arbitrate for many peoples. They will forge their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. This is what has mostly occurred under the auspices of the United Nations in its early decades. And for this reason, from this perspective, we are talking about a remarkable success in the history of nations that cannot be overlooked. Now, at some point, and as often happens with most bureaucratic structures that we humans create, this organization stopped upholding the principles outlined in its founding declaration and began to mutate. An organization that was originally conceived essentially as a shield to protect the realm of men has transformed into a multi-tentacled leviathan that seeks to decide not only what each nation-state should do, but also how all the citizens of the world should live. This is how we went from an organization that pursued peace to an organization that imposes an ideological agenda on its members, touching on a myriad of issues that affect human life in society. The model of the United Nations that had been successful, whose origins we can trace back to the ideas of President Wilson, who spoke of a society of peace without victory and was based on the cooperation of nation-states, has been abandoned. It has been replaced by a supranational government model of international bureaucrats who intend to impose a certain way of life on the citizens of the world. What is being discussed this week here in New York at the Summit of the Future is nothing other than the deepening of that tragic course that this institution has adopted, the deepening of a model that, in the words of the United Nations Secretary himself, demands the definition of a new social contract on a global scale, doubling down on the commitments of the 2030 Agenda, I want to be clear about the position of the Argentine agenda. The 2030 Agenda, although well-intentioned in its goals, is nothing more than a supranational government program of a socialist nature that aims to solve the problems of modernity with solutions that undermine the sovereignty of nation-states and violate the rights to life, liberty, and property of individuals. It is an agenda that aims to solve poverty, inequality, and discrimination with legislation that only deepens these issues, because the history of the world shows that the only way to guarantee prosperity is by limiting the power of the monarch, ensuring equality before the law, and defending the rights to life, liberty, and property of individuals. It has been precisely the adoption of this agenda that serves privileged interests, the abandonment of the principles outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations, that has distorted the role of this institution and set it on a wrong path. Thus, we have seen how an organization that was born to defend human rights has been one of the main drivers of the systematic violation of freedom, such as the global quarantines during the year 2020, which should be considered a crime against humanity. In this very House that claims to defend human rights, they have allowed the entry of bloody dictatorships like those of Cuba and Venezuela into the Human Rights Council without the slightest reproach. In this very House that claims to defend women's rights, it allows countries that punish their women for showing skin to enter the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. In this very House, there has been a systematic voting against the State of Israel, which is the only country in the Middle East that defends liberal democracy, while simultaneously demonstrating a total inability to respond to the scourge of terrorism. In the economic sphere, collectivist policies have been promoted that undermine economic growth, violate property rights, and hinder the natural economic process, ultimately preventing the most disadvantaged countries in the world from freely enjoying their own resources to move forward. Regulations and prohibitions driven precisely by the countries that developed by doing the same things they now condemn. A toxic relationship has also been promoted between global governance policies and international credit organizations, demanding that the most marginalized countries commit resources they do not have to programs they do not need, turning them into perpetual debtors to promote the agenda of global elites. The oversight of the World Economic Forum has not helped either, where ridiculous policies with Malthusian blinders are promoted, such as zero-emission policies that primarily harm poor countries, and policies related to sexual and reproductive rights, when the birth rate in Western countries is collapsing, signaling a bleak future for all. The organization has also not satisfactorily fulfilled its mission to defend the territorial sovereignty of its members, as we Argentinians know firsthand in relation to the Malvinas Islands, and we have even reached a situation where the Security Council, which is the most important body of this United Nations House, has become distorted, because the veto of its permanent members has started to be used in defense of the particular interests of some. This is where we stand today, with an organization powerless to provide solutions to the real global conflicts, such as the aberration and abhorrent Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has already cost the lives of more than 300,000 people, leaving over 1 million injured in the process. An organization that, instead of addressing these conflicts, invests time and effort in imposing on poor countries how and what they should produce, who they should associate with, what they should eat, and what they should believe, how it intends to dictate the present pact of the future. This long list of errors and contradictions has not been without consequence. It has resulted in the loss of credibility of the United Nations among the citizens of the free world and in the distortion of its functions. Therefore, I want to issue a warning. We are facing an end of a cycle. Collectivism and the moral posturing of the 2030 Agenda have collided with reality and no longer have credible solutions to offer for the real problems of the world. In fact, they never did. If the 2030 Agenda has failed, as its own promoters acknowledge, the response should be to ask ourselves whether it was a poorly conceived program from the start, accept that reality, and change course. One cannot expect to persist in error by doubling down on a failed agenda. It always happens the same way with ideas that come from the left. They design a model according to what they believe human beings should do. And when individuals freely act otherwise, they have no better solution than to restrict, repress, and curtail their freedom. We in Argentina have already seen with our own eyes what lies at the end of this path of envy and sad passions: poverty, degradation, anarchy, and a fatal absence of freedom. We still have time to steer away from that course. I want to be clear about something to avoid any misunderstandings. Argentina, which is currently undergoing a profound process of change, has decided to embrace the ideas of freedom. Those ideas that state that all citizens are born free and equal before the law, that we have inalienable rights granted by the Creator, among which are the rights to life, liberty, and property. Those principles that guide the process of change we are undertaking in Argentina are also the principles that will govern our international conduct from now on. We believe in the defense of the life of all. We believe in the defense of the property of all. We believe in freedom of expression for all. We believe in freedom of worship for all. We believe in freedom of commerce for all. And we believe in limited governments, all of them. And as what happens in one country quickly impacts others, we believe that all peoples must live free from tyranny and oppression, whether it takes the form of political oppression, economic slavery, or religious fanaticism. That fundamental idea must not remain mere words. It must be supported by actions, diplomatically, economically, and materially, through the joint strength of all the countries that defend freedom. This doctrine of the new Argentina is nothing more and nothing less than the true essence of the United Nations. That is the cooperation of the United Nations in defense of freedom. If the United Nations decides to return to the principles that gave it life and readapt the role for which it was conceived, count on the unwavering support of Argentina in the fight for freedom. Know also that Argentina will not support any policy that involves the restriction of individual freedoms in commerce or the violation of the natural rights of individuals. It doesn't matter who promotes it or how much consensus that institution has. For this reason, we want to officially express our dissent regarding the Pact of the Future signed on Sunday and invite all the free nations of the world to join us not only in dissenting this pact, but also in creating a new agenda for this noble institution, the agenda of freedom. From this day forward, know that the Republic of Argentina will abandon the historical position of neutrality that has characterized us and will be at the forefront of the fight in defense of freedom. For as Thomas Paine said, those who wish to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, endure the fatigue of defending it. May God bless the Argentines and all the citizens of the world, and may the forces of heaven be with us. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.